Hello, my name is Amira Khan. 5 years ago, I was a senior flight attendant for Skyjet Airlines, and I thought I had my life figured out. I loved my job. I loved the rhythm of airports, the smell of jet fuel, the late-night flights over glowing cities, the quiet moments before passengers boarded. Every takeoff felt like freedom. But freedom is fragile, and I learned that the hard way. It started on an ordinary morning in June. We were scheduled for a direct flight from London to Singapore, one of our premium routes. The crew was experienced, the passengers were mostly business class regulars, and everything seemed routine. I remember smiling as I walked through the aisle, checking the overhead bins, and greeting passengers with the same warmth I always did. I had no idea that day would be the last time I ever wore that uniform. Halfway through the flight, one of the passengers, a well-known socialite, reported that her diamond bracelet was missing. She had taken it off to sleep and placed it in the small drawer of her first-class suite. When she woke up, it was gone. A simple misunderstanding, I thought at first. People lose things on flights all the time, but this one wasn't going to end that easily. Within minutes, word spread through the crew, and then Daniel Reed, our in-flight supervisor, was called to handle it. He was tall, charming in the kind of way that made people trust him instantly, but there was always something about him that made me uneasy. Too smooth, too rehearsed. Daniel asked everyone to stay calm, then quietly called me aside. "Amira," he said, lowering his voice, "the passenger insists she saw you near her suite an hour ago. Did you touch anything?" I blinked at him, confused. "I was checking the cabin temperature, Daniel. I didn't even go near her drawer." He gave me a long look, the kind that makes your stomach twist, because you can already tell you're not being believed. "Just cooperate, all right? Let's check your service cart." They searched my cart, my personal pouch, and even my pockets. Nothing. I was embarrassed but calm until he opened my side compartment bag. Inside, tucked neatly under my scarf, was a velvet box containing the missing bracelet. My body froze. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced through every possibility, every second of the morning. I hadn't seen that box before. I hadn't even opened that bag since we took off. But Daniel's expression told me everything. Shock, disappointment, and beneath it, something coldly satisfied. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse me publicly. Instead, he whispered, "I think it's best we keep this quiet until we land. For your sake." The rest of the crew avoided my eyes for the rest of the flight. I served the passengers like a ghost, my smile mechanical, my voice empty. When we landed, security was waiting for me at the gate. I kept thinking there would be a chance to explain, that someone would realize the absurdity of it all. But Daniel's report was already filed. The passenger confirmed her accusation. Skyjet's HR conducted a rushed internal review, and within 3 days, I was terminated. The words on the letter said, "Violation of professional conduct and breach of trust." No one used the word theft directly, but everyone knew. In aviation, your name is everything. Once it's tainted, you're finished. Every airline I applied to afterward rejected me without explanation. The rumors spread faster than I could fight them. A crew member with sticky fingers. That's what one recruiter whispered, thinking I couldn't hear. I sold my apartment, moved into a shared flat, and worked at a coffee shop near Heathrow for months just to pay rent. I used to serve champagne at 30,000 feet. Now I was steaming milk for late-night travelers who barely looked up. My family didn't understand. My father stopped talking to me for a while. My mother cried every time she saw my old uniform. I tried to convince them I was innocent, but even they couldn't make sense of how that bracelet ended up in my bag. I replayed the moment in my head every night. The bag sitting under my seat. The few minutes I left it unattended when a passenger needed assistance. Daniel standing nearby with that calm expression. The pieces were there, but I didn't see the full picture yet. Not then. 6 months later, while scrolling through aviation forums, I stumbled on a short thread about an internal Skyjet investigation. Someone anonymously mentioned that Daniel Reed had resigned quietly after being accused of inventory irregularities. The post was vague, maybe even speculative, but it hit me like a jolt. Inventory irregularities. I remembered the time he had insisted on personally managing duty-free stock, the way he dismissed audits, the strange packages he'd sometimes carry off the aircraft. For the first time, a dark possibility surfaced. What if I had been framed to protect him? I tried to gather proof. I reached out to former colleagues, but they were scared to talk. Daniel had friends in management, and no one wanted to cross him. I wrote letters to Skyjet's ethics office, but they went unanswered. Eventually, I stopped fighting. My name was ruined, and fighting against a system that had already decided my guilt felt like shouting into a storm. For the next few years, I disappeared. I worked in catering, then as a receptionist. I stayed away from airports because even the sound of engines made my chest tighten. But something inside me refused to die. The skies had always been home to me, and even though they had turned cruel, I still longed to return. One night, sitting in my small apartment, I took out my old flight pin, the one they gave us on our first day at Skyjet. The silver wings were scratched, dull, but holding them reminded me of who I used to be. I decided I wouldn't let Daniel Reed's lie define me forever. It took another 2 years to rebuild. I took safety courses again, renewed my certifications, and applied to smaller airlines under different divisions. Slowly, doors began to open. It wasn't easy. Every interview meant facing the shadow of my past, but I learned to smile through it, to say, yes, I've had challenges. Instead of, I was framed. People respond better to strength than to stories of betrayal. Still, every time I looked out of an aircraft window, I thought of him. The man who smiled while destroying my life, the man whose perfect record remained untouched while mine was shredded to pieces. I used to wonder if he ever thought of me, if he ever felt even a flicker of guilt. Maybe he didn't. People like him rarely do. But life has a strange way of bringing the past back to you, sometimes in ways you least expect. And for me, that reckoning began years later, on a bright morning at Dubai International Airport, when I glanced at my passenger list and saw the name Daniel Reed written in neat black letters next to seat 3 amperes. My hands trembled for a moment, but my face remained composed. After all, I'd been trained to stay calm under pressure. I took a deep breath, straightened my uniform, and whispered to myself, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Reed. Let's see how this flight goes." After that humiliating fall from Skyjet, I vanished from the skies for years. The world of aviation moved on without me, but I never stopped feeling like I was standing just outside the life I loved, watching it slip further away. My name, once respected in every crew lounge from London to Doha, had become something whispered and avoided. But I refused to let that be the final chapter of my story. The road back was brutal. I worked in silence, saving whatever I could from a string of low-paying jobs. I did night shifts at a hotel front desk, logged hours at a call center, even cleaned charter jets parked at the airport tarmac. Ironic, really. I'd wipe down champagne glasses for passengers who would never know that the woman cleaning their seats once poured the drinks herself. But each day I worked around those planes, I felt a little closer to something that still called to me. I used to sit near the runway after my shift, watching takeoffs until security told me to move. The sight of those blinking lights cutting through the dark sky was a kind of therapy. It reminded me that no matter how far I'd fallen, there was still something up there waiting for me, so I decided to start over. I used my savings to renew my aviation certifications, safety, first aid, evacuation training, everything. Most of my old colleagues had moved on, but I didn't reach out to any of them. I didn't need pity. I needed a clean slate. The interviews were the hardest part. Every recruiter smiled politely when they saw my resume, then their tone shifted when they reached the Skyjet years. Some avoided asking, others did it directly. There was a disciplinary issue? One manager had asked, flipping through my file, "Would you like to explain what happened?" I learned to keep my answers short. There was a misunderstanding that wasn't resolved fairly. I've learned from it. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I tried telling the full story before, but it only made me sound desperate. People rarely want to hear about injustice unless it's happening to them. Months turned into years. Then one morning, I got a call from an HR manager at a small private charter company called Astra Air. They specialize in VIP and corporate flights, quiet, discreet service for executives, celebrities, and the ultra-rich. The kind of operation that ran on professionalism and trust. The irony didn't escape me. I was honest with them in the interview, more than usual. I told them I'd left the industry after an incident that nearly ruined me, but that I still loved aviation and wanted another chance to prove myself. The HR manager, a calm woman named Sophia, nodded thoughtfully. She said, "Everyone deserves a return flight, Miss Khan." 2 weeks later, I got the job. My first flight back was a short charter from Doha to Zurich. I was terrified. My hands shook when I buttoned my blazer, and for a moment, I thought I wouldn't make it through the safety demo. But once the engine started and the cabin filled with that familiar low hum, something inside me settled. It felt like breathing again after years underwater. Astra Air was different from commercial airlines. The crew was smaller, the service personnel, and the pressure was higher. Every passenger expected perfection, but I was ready for that. I'd been through worse. I made it my mission to stay invisible, efficient, polite, professional, but never too personal. My supervisors liked me for that. I never made mistakes, never broke protocol, never gave them a reason to doubt me. Still, I avoided socializing with the other crew members. I kept my past locked away, mentioning Skyjet only when necessary. I didn't want sympathy or curiosity. My reputation might have died there, but I hadn't. In my third year with Astra, I was promoted to lead attendant for the VIP division. It felt surreal. I'd gone from being the woman everyone suspected to the one trusted with billionaire clients and political figures. Every successful flight was a small piece of redemption, but even in those quiet victories, there was an ache that never fully went away. Sometimes at night, when I closed my eyes, I still saw Daniel Reed's face, his voice, the way he looked at me when security escorted me out of the Skyjet office, that half smile that said he'd already won. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that I'd moved on. But the truth was, I still carried that wound everywhere I went. Then came the Dubai to London assignment. It was supposed to be routine, a private business charter for a single high-profile consultant hired by one of Astra's partner firms. Sophia handed me the manifest the evening before the flight. "The passenger's important," she said. "Be at your best. The company's looking to expand, and this man could help us secure a new deal." I nodded, barely listening, until my eyes fell on the name printed in bold letters, Daniel Reed. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The page trembled slightly in my hands. I blinked, convinced I was seeing it wrong, but there it was. His name, his passport number, his signature. The room seemed to go quiet. I felt my pulse in my throat, a mix of disbelief and something darker, anger, fear, maybe both. I hadn't thought of him as a real person in years, more like a shadow that haunted my memory. But there he was, alive, successful, flying comfortably, while I had spent years scraping together my life piece by piece. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk staring at the flight plan, the catering notes, and the passenger briefing. My hands kept drifting to the old Skyjet pin I'd kept tucked in my drawer. I thought about everything he took from me, the career, the peace, the confidence. And now fate was placing him right back in my cabin, not as my superior this time, but as my passenger. It felt like a message. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Confront him, ignore him, pretend not to remember, but I knew one thing. I wasn't the same woman he destroyed. I wasn't the naive flight attendant who trusted people too easily. I'd learned to hide my emotions behind a perfect smile. When I arrived at the airport the next morning, I looked in the mirror before heading to the gate. My reflection stared back, steady eyes, composed posture, flawless uniform. No trace of the broken girl from 5 years ago. As I walked toward the aircraft, clipboard in hand, I whispered to myself, "You're not his victim anymore. You're in control now." I didn't know it yet, but that flight was gonna change everything. The morning of the Dubai to London flight started like any other, but my nerves betrayed me the moment I put on my uniform. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened my name badge. The reflection in the mirror looked calm and professional, but underneath, my heart was racing. It had been years since I last saw Daniel Reed, but I remembered every detail about him, the smooth confidence, the carefully measured words, the way he could smile while ruining someone's life. I arrived at the private terminal 2 hours early, pretending it was to oversee preparations, but truthfully, I needed the extra time to steady myself. The Astra Air Gulfstream G700 sat gleaming on the tarmac, its silver body reflecting the rising sun day. Inside, the cabin smelled of leather and polished wood. Everything had to be perfect. Champagne chilled, linens crisp, every glass placed at the same precise angle. That was my cover, professionalism. It hid everything I didn't want the world to see. The rest of the crew arrived a little later, just 2 pilots and another attendant named Lila, who was new to the company. She chatted cheerfully while setting up the galley, but her words barely reached me. My focus was fixed on the manifest clipped to my folder. Passenger, Daniel Reed. Seat 3 amperes. Consulting partner, Reed Global Aviation. Even reading his name sent a current of old anger through me. At exactly 9:40 a.m., the black Mercedes pulled up beside the steps. I was standing near the cabin door. Greeting position, smile rehearsed and steady. The driver opened the rear door, and Daniel Reed stepped out. He looked older. His hair had silvered at the temples, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes. But the confidence, that same infuriating self-assurance, was untouched. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, his expensive watch glinting in the sunday. The man who once stripped me of everything walked toward me as if the past had never happened. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," I said, keeping my voice calm. He looked up briefly, polite but distracted, clearly not recognizing me. "Good morning." He handed over his passport and boarding details with the detached ease of a frequent traveler. I scanned them, maintaining my professional smile. "Welcome aboard Astra Air. Your seat is 3 amperes. We'll be departing shortly." He gave me a quick nod, stepped inside, and took his place near the window. Watching him sit there, composed, relaxed, completely unaware, I felt something I hadn't in years: control. He had no idea who was standing just a few feet away from him. Once the engine started, I shifted into work mode. Lila was handling the front galley, so I stayed closer to the passenger area. As we leveled off above the clouds, I approached him with the service tray. "Would you care for a drink, Mr. Reed?" He looked up then, meeting my eyes for the first time. There was a flicker of something, a pause, a faint spark of recognition, but it passed quickly. "Just water, please." I poured it slowly, deliberately, giving him a chance to really look at me. When I handed him the glass, our fingers brushed briefly, and I saw it, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the confusion trying to place me. I turned and walked back to the galley before he could speak. For the next hour, I performed my duties as if nothing was wrong. But inside, I could feel the tension growing. I caught him glancing at me a few times, uncertain, trying to connect a memory that wouldn't settle. Finally, as I cleared his tray after lunch, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said lightly, "but have we met before?" I didn't look up right away. I finished stacking the silverware neatly, then said, "Once, a long time ago. Different uniform." He studied me for a moment, the polite smile fading from his face. "Skyjet?" "Yes," I said quietly. "You have a good memory." There it was, the crack in his expression, a flicker of something uncomfortable. He straightened in his seat, his professional composure shifting. "Ah, yes. I do remember now. Amira, wasn't it?" Hearing my name from his mouth made my stomach tighten, but I didn't show it. I nodded. "That's right." He forced a thin smile. "Well, this is quite a coincidence." "Coincidence?" I echoed softly. "That's one way to put it." Silence settled between us, heavy and sharp. I could see him searching for the right words, gauging how much I remembered, how much I cared. He probably expected me to be bitter or confrontational. Instead, I just smiled politely and said, "If you need anything, please let me know," before walking away. For the rest of the flight, Daniel grew restless. He opened and closed his tablet several times, scrolled through documents without focus, and even spilled a few drops of coffee on his shirt. The man who once commanded every room he walked into now couldn't sit still in a leather seat 30,000 feet above the ground. At one point, he walked to the lavatory, passing by me in the narrow aisle. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something, then changed his mind and continued inside. When he returned, his face was tense. He avoided eye contact for the rest of the flight. I kept my composure, served, cleaned, smiled, but inside, I was watching every reaction, every twitch, every attempt to keep calm. This was the same man who looked me in the eye years ago and pretended to care while tearing my life apart. Now he was trapped on my aircraft, thousands of feet above the earth, with nowhere to go and no control over what happened next. Halfway through the flight, turbulence hit. Light at first, then stronger. The cabin shook, the lights flickered slightly, and the pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of rough air. Please remain seated." I glanced at Daniel. He was gripping the armrest, his jaw tight. The same calm, confident supervisor who once dictated my fate now looked vulnerable for the first time. I moved down the aisle to check on him, my voice smooth and steady. "Everything all right, Mr. Reed?" He looked up, startled. "Yes, just not a fan of turbulence." I smiled faintly. "It passes quickly. Nothing to worry about." But as I walked away, I saw the reflection of his face in the polished panel, a flicker of recognition mixed with unease. He was starting to remember not just who I was, but what he had done. And the irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, I'd been powerless under his authority. Now, in the quiet hum of a pressurized cabin, 38,000 feet in the air, I was the one in control of his comfort, his safety, his peace of mind. The rest of the passengers, there were only 2 others, remained calm. But Daniel, he kept glancing toward me, uneasy, like a man haunted by a ghost he'd buried but couldn't forget. By the time the turbulence stopped, I knew something with absolute clarity. This flight wasn't just a coincidence. It was the universe circling back, giving me a chance I never thought I'd have, to look the man who destroyed my life in the eye and let him know I hadn't forgotten. And the best part? The flight wasn't even halfway over. The turbulence eased, but the tension in the cabin didn't. The hum of the engines filled the silence like background static, steady and endless. I moved quietly through the narrow aisle, collecting glasses, adjusting seatbelts, and checking on the other 2 passengers, though my focus stayed fixed on one man, Daniel Reed, seat 3 amperes. He hadn't touched his food in nearly half an hour. His fingers drummed softly on the armrest, a small, unconscious rhythm of nerves. Now and then, he'd glance at his tablet, then look around the cabin as if searching for something, someone to ground him. His old composure was gone, stripped away by altitude and guilt. "Would you like anything else to drink, Mr. Reed?" I asked as I approached him. He looked up sharply, as though he'd been lost in thought. "No, thank you," he said, voice tight. Then, after a pause, "You've done well for yourself, Amira. Astra Air, right? Private charter, very exclusive." The compliment was mechanical, forced, and I could hear the edge of discomfort beneath it. "Yes," I said, my tone even. "I've been here 3 years now. People deserve second chances, don't you think?" He froze for just a second, eyes flicking toward mine before darting away. "Yes, of course, they do." I smiled slightly and walked away, pretending to be busy, but my mind was moving faster than the aircraft. Every word, every shift in his tone confirmed what I'd suspected all along. He remembered everything. Maybe not the details, maybe not the guilt yet, but he knew who I was and what he'd done. The turbulence returned, sharper this time. The seatbelt sign chimed, and the aircraft jolted slightly. One of the passengers gasped. I made the safety announcement, my voice calm, clear, controlled. It wasn't severe turbulence, but it was enough to unsettle the cabin. Daniel's tablet slid off the table and hit the floor with a dull thud. He bent down to grab it, and when he looked up again, I saw real unease in his eyes. "This isn't normal, is it?" he asked. "It's perfectly normal," I replied softly. "Sometimes the sky just likes to remind us who's in charge." I could see sweat gathering near his temple. For the first time in years, I had the power in this dynamic, but I didn't want revenge in the way most people imagine. I didn't want to scream at him or cause a scene. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt: confusion, fear, helplessness, to understand what it's like when your fate is in someone else's hands. A few minutes later, the turbulence calmed again. I began serving coffee, starting with the other 2 passengers. When I reached Daniel's seat, I noticed he had taken out his laptop and was reviewing some documents. His hands were still unsteady. I placed the cup on his table and said quietly, "Careful with that. Wouldn't want another incident on board." His head snapped up. "What do you mean?" I tilted my head, smiling politely. "Nothing at all. Just remembering how unpredictable flights can be." He stared at me, eyes narrowing slightly. I could see him trying to read between the lines, trying to decide if I was threatening him or simply being friendly. He didn't know. That uncertainty was exactly what I wanted. An hour later, I walked through the cabin again to check on everyone. When I passed Daniel's seat, I noticed something strange. His briefcase was on the floor, half open, and the small thumb drive that had been plugged into his laptop earlier was missing. He was searching between the seats, muttering under his breath. "Is everything all right, Mr. Reed?" I asked, stopping beside him. He looked up, startled. My USB drive, it's gone. It was just here. That's unfortunate, I said softly. Maybe check under the cushion or your jacket pocket. I've checked everywhere, he snapped. His calm facade was cracking. There were confidential reports on that drive. I'll help you look, I offered, kneeling beside him. I reached down to check under the seat, pretending to search while he hovered nervously above me. The drive wasn't there. I knew it wouldn't be. I had noticed him drop it earlier when the turbulence hit, and I had quietly picked it up during my rounds, slipped it into my service pouch right where no one else could see. I didn't plan to keep it. I didn't even know what was on it. But something inside me wanted him to squirm, to lose control, to experience even an ounce of the panic he had once inflicted on me. It's all right, I said, finally, standing. These things have a way of turning up. I'll have a look after service. He nodded stiffly, clearly trying to compose himself. But I could tell the thought of losing that drive was eating at him. He sat there for a long time, staring out the window, tapping his fingers against the tray table. Then came the wine. During dinner service, I poured a glass of Merlot for him. As I set it down, the aircraft tilted slightly, and the glass tipped forward, splashing onto his briefcase. Red streaks spread across the tan leather, staining it instantly. Damn it, he hissed, grabbing a napkin. I'm so sorry, I said quickly, handing him another towel. Turbulence again. He didn't answer. He just glared at me, breathing hard, his jaw tight. I could see it, the loss of control burning in his eyes. Once, he'd made me small with that same look. Now, he was the one shrinking. A few minutes later, I returned to check on him. His composure had fractured completely. You think this is funny, don't you? He said under his breath. I blinked, feigning confusion. Excuse me? You're enjoying this. The drink, the turbulence, He stopped himself, realizing how irrational he sounded. Never mind. I leaned closer, my tone low but calm. You're imagining things, Mr. Reed. Maybe you're just uncomfortable being reminded of the past? His expression faltered. What do you want from me, Amira? I smiled. Just to do my job. I walked away before he could answer. Inside, my heart was pounding. I wasn't sure if I'd crossed a line or finally drawn one. For the rest of the flight, he didn't speak another word. He sat stiffly in his seat, staring out the window into the dark expanse of sky. I knew he was thinking about me, about what I might remember, about whether I had proof of what he'd done. The irony was exquisite. He'd once engineered a situation to make me look guilty of a crime I didn't commit. Now, high above the earth, he was the one trapped in uncertainty, wondering what I might be capable of. When I passed by him one last time before descent, I paused beside his seat. Everything comfortable, Mr. Reed? I asked softly. He looked up at me, eyes wary, voice low. You haven't changed much. Neither have you, I replied. But don't worry, we'll be landing soon. And then I smiled, a calm, knowing smile that unsettled him more than any accusation could. He didn't know yet that I had the missing drive. He didn't know that it contained far more than he'd ever intended to carry on board, but he would find out soon enough. The sky outside was clear again, but in that cabin, the storm had just begun. The descent into London began just after sunset. The city lights glimmered far below like scattered gold dust, and the cabin filled with that familiar calm before landing. But there was nothing calm about what was happening between C3 Amperes and me. Daniel Reed sat rigid, his tie loosened, his eyes darting toward me every time I moved. He looked like a man haunted by something he couldn't name. The other passengers were relaxed, chatting quietly or scrolling through their phones. Only Daniel seemed out of place, tense, sweaty, restless. The missing USB drive had undone him completely. He had spent the last hour searching through his briefcase and laptop bag, growing more frantic each time he came up empty. I stood near the galley, the small thumb drive hidden inside my pocket. My mind raced. I hadn't planned this, not really. When I picked it up, it was just instinct, an impulse born from old pain. But now, holding it, I knew this was more than an accident. This was proof. Proof that the universe had a strange sense of justice. When the seatbelt sign came on for final descent, I made my way down the aisle one last time. Daniel was staring out the window, lost in thought, when I stopped beside him. "Everything all right for landing, Mr. Reed?" He looked up, startled. His voice was sharp. "No, everything is not all right. My property is missing. I intend to report this." I nodded calmly. "Of course. I'm sure it'll turn up. Things usually do." He narrowed his eyes. "Don't play games with me." "I'm not," I said softly. Then, after a pause, "But you used to, didn't you?" He froze. The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" I leaned closer, my voice low enough for only him to hear. 5 years ago, the skyjet London-Singapore route, the missing bracelet. His lips parted, but no words came. I watched the recognition hit him fully this time. He remembered everything. "I never forgot," I continued. "The humiliation, the security guards, the looks from the other crew. You told me to keep quiet for my sake. Do you remember that, Daniel?" His throat worked as he tried to find his voice. "You don't understand what was happening back then." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You were smuggling merchandise through crew luggage. That bracelet wasn't stolen, it was planted. And you needed someone to take the fall." His eyes flicked toward the cockpit, then back to me. He lowered his voice. "You don't know what you're talking about." I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing the USB drive. "Then maybe this will help refresh your memory." I placed it gently on his tray table. He stared at it, speechless. "That's yours, isn't it?" I said. "You dropped it during turbulence." Slowly, he picked it up, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at me, suspicion warring with fear. "What did you do with it?" "Nothing," I said. "Not yet. But it's funny what people keep on these things. Documents, contracts, maybe records." He swallowed hard. "You went through my private files?" "No," I said, my tone calm. "But I could have. And you know what? It doesn't matter. Because I think you've been carrying your own evidence around for years without realizing it." The plane jolted slightly as we entered a patch of rough air again. Daniel gripped the armrest, his face pale. I could see the panic rising, the same panic I'd felt 5 years ago when I was dragged off that plane in front of everyone. He leaned toward me. "What do you want, Amira?" I looked at him, my expression steady. "The truth." He blinked. "What truth?" "The one you buried under a stolen bracelet and a falsified report. The one that ruined my life." The plane began its final approach. The engines roared louder, the lights dimmed, and I could see the reflection of both of us in the cabin window. Him, anxious and cornered. Me, calm and composed. He opened his mouth, then stopped. His face shifted from defensiveness to resignation. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said finally. "Try me." He exhaled slowly. It wasn't supposed to go that way. I was under pressure. Someone above me was using crew routes to move things, jewelry, watches, and luxury items. The socialite that day was part of it. When the audit started, I needed a diversion. You were convenient. Clean record, good reputation, everyone trusted you. That's what made it work. For a moment, the cabin disappeared around me. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. He said it so casually, as if he were explaining a bad decision, not destroying a life. "You framed me," I said quietly. His voice dropped even lower. "If I hadn't, they would have gone after me. You don't know what that company was really doing, and you let me pay the price." He didn't answer. I took a small breath, then said, "This flight is being recorded, Daniel." He frowned. "What?" "Cabin audio. Standard on private charters." I gestured toward the hidden microphones in the ceiling. "Everything you just said, it's on record." His face went white. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," I said, smiling faintly. "But I already sent a copy of that USB's contents to my lawyer before we took off, just in case." He stared at me, realization dawning. He had no control left. The man who once manipulated systems, people, and policies to protect himself was now trapped midair with his own words. When the aircraft touched down at Heathrow, he didn't move. The seatbelt sign switched off, and the other passengers began collecting their bags, chatting softly about their connections and dinner plans. Daniel sat frozen, eyes fixed on the USB drive still in his hand. "Welcome to London," I said quietly as I passed him. "You'll find the authorities waiting by the terminal. I took the liberty of making sure they knew who you were." His head snapped up. "What did you do?" I leaned close, just enough for him to hear. "What you taught me. I made sure the right people believed the right story. Only this time, it's true." I walked away before he could speak. As the door opened and cool air rushed into the cabin, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not revenge, not triumph, just the quiet release of truth, finally catching up to the lies. When I stepped off the plane, I saw two plainclothes officers waiting near the jetway, scanning the incoming passengers. I didn't look back, but I knew they'd stop him. I knew it was over. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and saw an email from my lawyer. Subject line: read investigation confirmed. Attached was a copy of the confession transcript from the in-flight audio. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the screen. Then I smiled, softly. Justice at 38,000 feet, I whispered. It wasn't the same sky I used to love, but it was mine again. When Amira finally closed her laptop that night, the city outside her window was quiet. The glow from the streetlights stretched across her desk, touching the framed photograph of her old skyjet crew. For the first time in 5 years, she could look at it without bitterness. Daniel Reed was under investigation. Within 48 hours, news broke that the so-called aviation consultant had been linked to an international smuggling network that used commercial and charter flights for years. His name was everywhere. Headlines, forums, and industry circles. The same man who once stood above her, smug with authority, now faced the cameras in handcuffs. But Amira didn't celebrate. She didn't post about it or tell anyone from her new crew. She just showed up for her next flight. The sky didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a promise kept. On her following assignment, she was scheduled for another London-Dubai leg, this time with new passengers and a different aircraft. As she went through her pre-flight checks, her reflection in the galley mirror caught her eye. For years, that reflection had reminded her of what she'd lost. Now, it reminded her of what she'd reclaimed: her name, her dignity, her peace. Captain Rami, a quiet man with salt and pepper hair, leaned out of the cockpit. "All set, Amira?" She smiled. "All set, Captain." Once the passengers boarded, Amira moved gracefully through the cabin. Her confidence was effortless, her voice calm and reassuring. She wasn't haunted anymore. She'd faced the ghosts that had followed her across skies and cities, and she'd won, not with violence or vengeance, but with truth and patience. Hours later, when the plane cruised above the clouds, she stood by the window for a moment. The moonlight washed over the wing, and the world below was just a sea of shadows. She thought of how small everything seemed from up here: the lies, the fear, the people who had once tried to break her. Her phone buzzed softly in her apron pocket. A message from her lawyer read, "Case closed, charges filed, you're officially cleared in all Skyjet records." Amira let out a quiet breath, one that felt like it had been trapped in her chest for years. She tucked the phone away and turned toward the sleeping passengers. There was a calmness in her movements now, a lightness she hadn't known in so long. When she whispered the words "cabin secure" to the cockpit, it wasn't just part of her duty. It was a quiet declaration of something deeper. The past was secure. The storm was over. As the plane soared through the quiet night, Amira smiled faintly to herself. She had once been forced out of the sky in disgrace. Now she flew again, not as the woman who had been broken, but as the one who had rebuilt herself above the clouds. And somewhere, far below, justice finally rested on solid ground.